So who has it harder in prison, men or women? In today's video, I'm going to break down the key differences and give you guys my opinion on who has it harder, and I'm also going to add in a couple of my friends' opinions because I might be biased, so I have to reach out to the homies for some help. If you guys are new here, hi, my name is Jess. I'm a person in long-term recovery who has in fact been to prison. And she a girl. If you want to follow me on any other social media platform, TikTok, Instagram, Patreon, that's $2. It's only ever going to be $2. All of that is linked down below, as well as my vlog channel, my podcast, and my Facebook page. Also, I'm going to be adding a lot more mini vlogs on Patreon. Well, we've already started to do that. And you're going to see things that you won't see over here on Patreon, and also you'll probably see things first over there. All right, I have a lot to say. I'm going to start an entire internet war with this video. Let's just kick this thing off. So what I think is really funny is I asked all of my friends, hey, who do you think has it harder in prison, men or women? All of my female friends said men have it harder. All of my male friends said women have it harder. And like, what? Crazy, right? But every single day I see in my comment section, by the hundreds across all my platforms, how a lot of people think that women have it easier in prison. And it's like this constant debate in my comment section. So I'm here to squash it. I'm here to dead it. You know what I mean? Like, we're gonna clear the air today. The only thing I don't like about that type of conversation is it's usually directed at me and like people telling me that I didn't do hard time, and like, you don't know what someone goes through, right? And that can be true for any situation. So if someone says something is traumatic, don't try to downplay that or minimize that or like try to make them think that their trauma wasn't traumatic. Like, you weren't there, bro. Like Johnny Depp vibes. Were you there? The first key difference that I want to point out when it comes to men versus women is men usually have organized gangs. They have gangs, they have rival gangs, they have prison politics, and a lot of rules surrounding gang life and gang activity. Not every prison has gangs, and not every facility you have to join a gang if you're a man, but there are a lot of gangs in prison. Because of that, a lot of people think that, you know, it's harder to be a man in prison. They're, you know, more aggressive and more violent, and the gang activity is crazy, and you're seeing people get, you know, cut up all the time and like, right? Totally fair. Well, just comparing apples to apples, gangs are the male, you know, structure, right? Like a lot of prison gangs for the male side. Opposite side of that, if we're just comparing apples to apples, the opposite side of that looks like Squishamallows for women. So like for men, it's like shanks and murder and violence and whatever. And then the female side, it's like Squishamallow. And I'm not saying that women can't be violent. I'm saying that the equivalent on the female side to gangs would be family units. So the way that men gang up and they create gangs and organizations in prisons, women tend to create family units, and that would be just apples to apples comparison, right? So for women, they tend to have like a prison mom, prison dad, prison siblings, and they have those little family structures and those little family units. That does not mean that women are not violent. It does not mean that women cannot throw down. It does not mean that women don't get aggressive and get in fights, because they do. However, men tend to be a lot more violent, so that is why people think that men have it harder in prison. But when I asked every single one of my female friends that have gone to prison, they will all say men have it harder. When I asked the men who has it harder, they said women have it harder. But you would think like if it's more violent on the male side and there's gangs and there's all of these things, it would be harder for men, right? A lot of the guys that I'm friends with, JD and JC from Wrong Too Strong and Prison Life Inside and Out, and all of the guys that have gone to prison that I'm really good friends with, Adam Clausen, they'll tell you that yes, the gang activity is crazy, you know, and these are guys that have served time in state, federal, Mexican prison. Yes, the gang life is really tough and it can be very violent and very gory, but the men tend to take care of each other and protect each other and look out for each other. So that is just kind of the flip side of the coin there, is that if you are in an organization, chances are you're going to be taken care of and you're not really gonna have to worry and watch your back in the same way. Apples to apples, gangs versus family units, I'm gonna give the men a point for being harder than the female side, because that is more violent and more gory. Number two, in terms of being taken care of when you go to prison, and that's having someone on the outside continuously come visit you, get money on the phone, write you letters, and put money on your books. That's what it looks like to take care of an inmate, right? In terms of that, I have seen So many women have to, write strangers because their family, their husband, their boyfriends, the family on the outside, they're not coming to see them as much. Men and women are just hardwired a little bit differently. So I think a lot of women are just very natural caregivers where they are writing letters, they're putting money on the phone, they're taking care of the men, they're going to see the man every single weekend, and they're very supportive in that relationship. Not always, but I have seen men get taken care of a lot better in terms of someone is on the outside taking care of them versus the women. And you would think that that would be the opposite, right? You would think that the women would have, family on the outside or what have you, but sometimes our only family are our significant other and our kids. So in terms of who gets taken care of better in prison, family members on the outside is what I'm specifically talking about. I would say that the women do have it harder in this sense, where men are not as attentive, not in all cases. Statistically speaking, men are not as attentive and constantly there for their significant other throughout the duration of their prison stay. So I would say that we are tied. The women get a point for that being a little bit harder. And if you don't believe me, there are a lot of articles that support the fact that men get twice as many visits as women during their incarceration. Pulled up an article just a second ago on Rikers Island, and it says, it's from the Daily News, and it says male inmates at the jail complex get twice the number of visits compared to their female counterparts. And I just think that is, like I said, because women tend to be more natural caregivers. They're more attentive, speaking generally. So we're tied 1-1. Number 3 is prison structure and prison policies. Now, in terms of how prisons were created, who they had in mind when they designed these rules, these policies, and these structures, I would say that women have a disadvantage in terms of policies being written with the idea that men are going to go to prison, and they're really outdated. What do I mean by that? So in a lot of facilities across this country, the policies regarding how you care for an inmate were designed with the idea that men would be violent and aggressive. And a really good example to this would be going to the hospital. Well, they have to be restrained. Inmates have to be in handcuffs, leg shackles, they have to be restrained when they go to the hospital. But that policy was written with the idea that men would be going to prison and going to hospitals. No one even considered in writing those rules and that structure that women would go pregnant, right? And it would be a danger to their unborn child if they were walking around with leg chains and shackles and a belly chain and they were giving birth chained to the bed, right? So that policy is just very flawed. And that is, I know, a very specific example of that, but you can see that throughout the prison system. There's plenty of people that talk about this. Pretty sure Dr. Phil did an entire episode on this, but it's really clear in the wording of prison rules and prison policies. There are even facilities that don't want to give tampons. There are facilities that, especially in the South, sorry, I hate to say it, but there's this very clear undertone of you should be home with the kids. You shouldn't be here. It's your fault. And it's just really obvious, not just in written policy, but just how guards interact with women, even just down to prison basics, like how many rolls of toilet paper an inmate needs, how many pairs of underwear an inmate needs, how many pairs of clean clothes does an inmate need. Those rules were written with the idea that men would be going to prison. Women need more than 3 pairs of underwear a week. We just do. I'm gonna need 7 pairs of underwear a week because I would like to change my underwear every day. Thanks. Thank you. I guess it's different for men and boxers, but inmates get 3 pairs of underwear, 3 pairs of socks, 3 outfits, like 3 prison outfits, long johns, a hat, jacket, right? Boots. So this was written specifically with men in mind, from toilet paper to clothes to leaving the facility, and all of that was structured with the idea of men being in prison, not women. And the rules haven't changed. And it is really hard to get the facilities and get guards to bend the rules when it comes to the safety of women in prison and them being pregnant and so on and so forth. So in terms of who has it harder here, I would say the women get a point for this one in terms of it being harder. Speaking of prison policy and prison structures, let's move on to how the COs treat the inmates. You're gonna get a different story from every single person that has done time because we've all had different experiences. Facilities might be different. COs tend to show more respect towards the men because men will punch you in the mouth if you disrespect them. They're pretty external with their anger, as where women tend to be more internal with their anger. So I have seen the guards treat men a little bit differently because, oh my gosh, I don't want you to punch me or fight me physically, right? And have you seen the men in prison? They work out every day. There's no days off. They're just in there. You know what I mean? Like, whew. COs on the female side tend to be a little more aggressive. They tend to bully women, talk down to women, and just get really nasty to women because they know they could very easily overpower them. As we're men, they're gonna shut it down, right? So I'm pretty sure you're going to think that I'm gonna give the women a point in terms of saying that women have it harder in this sense, but I'm actually going to go the other way and give men a point in terms of it being harder, because a lot of times, because their anger is so external and they lash out physically towards one another or towards a staff member, they're probably going to serve more time in solitary confinement, and that is a lot harder to deal with. So I'm gonna say that men have it harder in terms of their day-to-day life in that category, and there are pros and cons with all of that, right? So like, yes, the man is not going to take an inmate or a staff member disrespecting them, especially openly, which COs tend to do. They're not gonna take that. So in my mind, I'm like, yeah, don't take the disrespect, man. But on the other side, it makes their life harder, and their reputation matters a little bit more on the male side than it does the female side. So they have to defend themselves, which brings me to another layer of this: reputation. In prison, your reputation matters on both the male side and the female side. It matters, you know, it matters what people think of you. It matters if you borrow a couple of soups and you don't pay it back. People know. Everything that you do is being watched either by an inmate or a guard, and we're bored. We're watching you. We're people watchers, right? So in terms of your reputation in prison, I think men have it harder in this sense. They have to defend themselves. They can't let someone talk crap to them. They can't let someone step to them. They can't let someone call them certain names. They have automatic fighting words, and their reputation really matters. It will stay with you your entire prison stay, the same way that your reputation stays with you on the female side, but it is not as dire, right? Like, it's not going to be as difficult to deal with on the female side because females tend to be less violent. And men do have to constantly, you know, make sure that they are keeping their word, they are respected. It is really hard for them to make sure that, you know, their reputation is strong and that everyone knows that you can't disrespect John because he will punch you in the mouth, or he's a really solid dude. You know, if he borrows something from you, he's gonna pay it back. That matters a lot in prison, but it really matters on the male side because you can get yourself in a very violent, very messy situation really quickly. The female side, it matters, but it's not life or death, right? It's not something that you have to worry about not going home over, which is different. So I would say the men get a point for that. Let's talk about mental health in prison. Now, mental health is pretty crappy across the board, period. When it comes to prisons, they have to make sure that they're like legally making sure that you're physically alive, and they have to make sure that there is a psychologist and mental health team on the compound. That is a requirement for every facility. And you know, when you're first in intake, they come in, they're like, how are you? Are you thinking of unaliving yourself? And you're day one in intake, right? And you're like a deer in headlights, and you're like, no. In your head, you're like, kinda now. Like, it's an intense, scary day, right? It's like almost like an out-of-body experience. Well, unless you put in a kite, aka a letter, to go to mental health, that's the only time that you're gonna see mental health, is day one in intake, unless you specifically ask for it. Well, for men, I know that it is a little bit harder for them to be able to show their emotions or cry, and it seems as though, and I'm speaking generally, that men have an easier time with anger because that seems to be more accepted in our society. In prison, anger seems to be the only emotion that is accepted across the board for men, and it's easier. Anger is easier than anything else, like crazy. For women, it is a little bit more accepted to cry, and if you're crying, you know, on the female side, there are probably people that are going to come up to you and make sure that you're okay, and it is a daily occurrence on the female side that women do get really emotional for a lot of different reasons. And I'm not saying that the men don't get emotional. I'm just saying that it is a little bit harder for them because they don't want to be seen as weak. The women, you know, tend to be a little bit more emotional in a general sense. I'm not saying this is not like black and white, right? This is just generally. The women will come together and try to make sure that you're okay. So I would say in terms of that, like, it is a little bit harder on the male side for that too. Being away from your family, who has it harder, men or women? Well, obviously they're both very difficult. Obviously, both men and women miss their family, they miss their kids. I think the emotional weight of missing your children hits hard regardless, but I think the women tend to beat themselves up more and they feel more guilty for leaving their children and leaving their family than the men do. And I'm not saying that the men don't, but mom guilt is a real thing. Moms get shamed if they don't feed their kid dairy-free, gluten-free, non-GMO, H2O-free leaves, organic grass, right? Like, we get mom shame no matter what. Imagine going to prison and leaving your children, and gosh, if they're small, the mom shame and the mom guilt really weighs on us, and I think it just weighs on us differently. So in terms of like leaving your kids and leaving your family, who has it harder, men or women? I'm gonna give the women a point, but I'm gonna give the men half a point over here because it is harder. I think it just hits a little bit differently. Of course the men miss their babies. Of course they miss their families. But I think the emotional weight is just different, right? It's just different. In terms of our physical bodies being in prison, who has it harder, men or women? Whew, this is tough. Okay, this is tough. Let's just talk about periods. So cis men in prison don't get periods. I'm using that right? God, I'm so bad with all, I'm trying. I'm so bad with all the words. I don't want to disrespect or offend any of my trans babies. But they don't get a period. Women do. In a lot of facilities, they don't understand that. And you have men telling you, no, you can't have more than 2 pads a day. No, you can't have this. You can't have that. You can't have more toilet paper. No, you can't have extra underwear even though you had an accident. And I think that is a lot harder in terms of what our physical body does. And again, going back to the policies, they just don't care. It's 3 pairs of underwear, however many rolls of toilet paper the facility gives you. Some guards will tell you, no, you can't have more than 2 pads a day. And that is really hard physically. So when we're just talking about like clothing and periods, it's tough, right? Also, the only hygiene that the state gives you is this tiny little piece of bar soap, tiny little toothbrush, a little tube of glue. It's toothpaste. Your breath will smell disgusting and it feels gross, it tastes gross. Okay, so this kit that you get, like how is that catered to women at all? You know, and I'm not saying that men don't have luscious, beautiful hair, but we need shampoo, we need conditioner, we need tampons, we need pads, we need more underwear than that. So in terms of what our physical body does, the women have it a lot harder when it comes to this, and we have to pay for all of our hygiene stuff, right, on both sides. But we, as women, need more hygiene stuff than the men do on the male side. We need more clothes than they do. So the women get a point for this being harder, and everything is layered. Are there guards out there that will help you out and give you an extra pair of underwear, or they'll help you out and get you clean clothes? Of course. This is not like a blanket statement. This is not one size fits all. Every facility is different. Everyone's experience is different. There are guards that will go above and beyond and make sure that you are taken care of, especially if you have a period accident. But the fact that this is not just a given, the fact that I've had to fight for tampons is just crazy to me. In terms of how the inmates interact with each other and the vibe on the compound, who has it harder, men or women? And what I mean by that is men tend to stick together against the system. Women don't, in my experience. The women won't stick together and they'll kind of be a little more gossipy, a little more, you know, drama-ish. They tend to snitch, even dry snitch. And I know men do that too, but the ways the inmates will snitch is they'll put a kite into the CO or they'll just dry snitch. So a CO will come in the unit and they'll say something out loud, knowing that the guard will hear it. They tend to be like more catty and they don't stick up for each other, or they don't come together to fight for, you know, a common cause like better living conditions in the same way that men do. Is that always? No. Is that a blanket statement? No. I'm just speaking in general terms. A lot of women are afraid to stand up against the system. They're afraid to stand up for themselves. Because of that, they don't really stick together. The men will stick together to get better living conditions and, you know, to be treated better and what have you. They will. I've seen that time and time and time again. So the women have it harder, but that's because that's their fault, right? Because they're not coming together to fight for, you know, what they believe in, what they think, and like better living conditions and all of that. So who is serving the most time in prison? Who has it harder in terms of sentencing? So according to all of my research and all of the data that we have on this, men are more likely to serve twice as much prison time as their female counterparts. Now there's a lot of variables to this. It's not, you know, one size fits all. Every case is different, every judge is different, every state is different, and it goes on a lot of things. So while that sounds crazy that men will serve twice as much time as women, what was the situation? What was his background versus her background? I gotta take my sweater off. I'm getting sweaty, I'm getting nervous. So let's just say that a guy and a girl committed the same crime individually in the same state and they have no criminal history. It's their first time offenders. They should get the same amount of time. And in a lot of cases, I have seen that. Where it gets really confusing is, let's say Mark has 4 prior convictions for different things, robbery and drug charges, and then I get arrested and I am a first-time offender, but we got arrested for the same thing. This guy got arrested for possession of an ounce of meth, right? And so did I. Well, he's gonna get more time than me. Let's say I'm a first-time offender and he has a huge criminal history. Of course he's gonna get more time than me because I'm a first-time offender. So the sentencing is going to be different. That is where it gets really sticky and that's where it gets really tough. It should always be, you know, the same thing, apples to apples, your gender shouldn't affect it at all. If we commit the same crime, we have the same criminal history, and we're in the same state, we should get the same sentence. It's just really hard to differentiate that, and it's hard to look at every single person, every single case, and how they got the sentence that they did. Did they fight for a better case? Did they fight for a better sentence? So the last time I was arrested, I sat in county for 6 months and I waited for the third plea agreement. My first plea agreement was 20 years. I said, no, absolutely not. Nope, I'm good. I waited in county, I got a 10-year sentence handed to me, and I said, no, I'm gonna still sit here. And they threatened me, they intimidate you, they threaten you, they try to force you to go to trial, knowing that you're gonna lose, right? Knowing that you're gonna get the max at trial, and they really try to force you to take plea agreements. So what was that variable? Yeah, we might have had the same exact charges and the same exact criminal history, but did you take the first plea agreement just to get out of county jail? And did I sit in county for 6 months and wait for a better option? Who knows, right? So there is so many components to this, and it's so hard to say, like, clearly, definitively, yep, men always get it, men have it harder, they always have it harder, they get more time. But why do they get more time? You have to break it down by their criminal history, what pleas they took, what lawyer they had even, which is why the system is so flawed. A lot of times people with high power attorneys versus a very tired and overworked public defender, they can fight for you better, right? So that's another flaw in the system, but it is not as cut and dry as men get more time than women. But since all the data says that, we're gonna give the men a point. Okay, now in my opinion, who has it harder, men or women? You ready? I think that everyone has it hard in prison. It's just different. I think men have it hard in prison because of other men, because of the other male inmates. It's more gory, it's more violent. It could be life or death, right? I think they have it harder in terms of their day-to-day, everyday life. And I'm not saying the system is not hard for men. I'm not saying it's not hard to be there as a man. I'm just saying, like, the day-to-day life is just different, right? So a lot of times men have it hard in prison because of other men. Women have it hard in prison because of the system. They're both hard. They're hard just in different ways. So I personally am not going to say that men have it harder than women or women have it harder than men. I think we all have it hard. It's just different. And there's so many flaws to the system, and there's so many things that we could be doing better. So my vote is neutral. I'm Switzerland. I just wanted to present all of these to you so that you guys could make your decision or your comparison. But at the end of the day, we all have it hard in prison. It is a very dehumanizing, dark, very difficult place to be. And like I said, I'm Switzerland, and you should be too. It's just funny that all of my female friends said that men have it harder and all of my male friends said that females have it harder. So that just means that I have really good friends that are empathetic and open to, you know, seeing it from the other side and recognizing the struggles of, you know, their female counterpart or the male counterpart. The system is messing us all up the same. The system is against all of us in the same way. Prisons want the men to gang up because if they're fighting each other, then they're not fighting the system. Not always though, because they riot. So we all have it hard in prison, just in really different ways. All right, you guys, I'm gonna end today's video here. As always, I love you. Stay safe, stay in recovery, whatever that looks like to you. Don't break the law. I can tell you all about prison. And I will see you guys in my next one.